the Philadelphia. Oh, recording is important. Got it. Okay. So the Philadelphia Museum of Art voted to unionize in 2020. And following that, the Penn Museum voted to unionize in 2021. As costs of living rise and as wages stagnate, the topic of unionization amongst museum workers is a hot button topic. Other industries are also seeing organized unionization efforts, as we've seen in the news. Perhaps you've been following what's going on at Amazon or at Starbucks or recently with Kellogg's. The topic of unionization in the museum world is an important topic. And because of that, the Museum Council wants to make it an issue that's discussed amongst our cohort. That being said, officially the Museum Council does not endorse or oppose unions as a general concept. So on to our panelists. I guess if you all just like kind of want to say hi as I introduce you, so everyone knows who you are. First up is Jessica Lubniski. Jessica Lubniski. Sorry, can you pronounce your name? My apologies.
Sorry, we should have gone over this. I forgot it's so hard. Lubineski.
Lubineski, Jessica Lubineski. Jessica is Academic Engagement Coordinator at the Penn Museum. Jessica is affiliated with the Penn Museum Workers United Local 397. Next up is Maria Marchinovka, the Senior Assistant Editor at MoMA in New York City. She is the steward for the Professional Administrative Staff Association, a union affiliated with UAW Local 2110. And finally, we have Adam Rizzo, coordinator of college and pre-professional programs at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and educational coordinator. He is affiliated with the Philadelphia Museum of Art Union. So thank you all for joining us this evening. And because we're only going to 7 p.m., I'm just going to go right into the questions, if that's quite all right with you all. So first up, what is a union anyway? And what does belonging to a union mean to you three? Why unionize? And in addition to that, what is the actual process that you went through to start a union at your institution? So if I can call on people, I would like to, oh, true, yes. My apologies, I totally forgot that we have a poll going. So before Adam answers that question, I want to know, and we at the Museum Council in general want to know, do you work for a museum or nonprofit? And what kind of museum do you work for if you work for one? This will help inform our discussion as we kind of go on through tonight. Oh, and I have to introduce myself too. Golly, look at me. So anyway, while you all are voting, my name is Alex Palma. I'm the assistant director at Carpenter's Hall, which is a small historic site in Old City. Carpenter's Hall was founded by the Carpenters Company, which is the oldest continually operating trade guild in the United States. The guild was originally established by house carpenters who came to Philadelphia to help sort of set up the city as a built landscape. So they've a really important legacy, not only in the Philadelphia trades, but like in Philadelphia architecture. And related to this panel, if I might be a little bit self-promoting before we start, on May 2nd, we will be having a labor history symposium across the street from our site at the Science History Institute. And for those of you who are abroad, whether you're in Chicago, LA, Ohio, or elsewhere, you might be interested to hear that this will be recorded. And so you may watch the recording after it happens if you're interested. So I just dropped a sign up link in the chat. I think everybody's voted in the poll, and should we share the results? I guess we should, right? There we go. All right, look at that. Thank you for voting, everybody. I appreciate that. So to follow up, to finish my original thought, what is a union and what does belonging to a union mean to you? Why unionize? And what is the actual process that you went through to start a union? Just to say the question again. And Adam, if you would like to start us off, please do.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. So thanks, first of all, for inviting me tonight. It's so nice to see all of these folks here to participate in this conversation. So that's a really long, multi-part question, which I'm going to try and answer as briefly as possible. I will share, like why a union? I think, first of all, there's great power in collective bargaining. And, I work at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and our union represents close to 200 workers at the museum across departments. And as a collective, we are able to bargain in our contract for certain protections, whether it's job security, wage increases that are transparent and that are not only transparent but also guaranteed over the course of the life of the contract. We have a seat at the table, so to speak, with management. Right now, we're negotiating our first contract. It's a long process, but we have more power together to create change within an institution than we do on our own. Why a union? Within our unit of close to 200 people, 1 in 5 of us make less than $15 an hour. This is at a museum with a $600 million endowment and an annual operating budget around $60 million a year. 60% of all full-time employees who are in the unit make $50,000 a year or less. This is not a sustainable way of operating, I think, for an institution like ours. Like you said, these past 2 years have been really challenging for so many reasons. Cost of living has gone up in enormous ways, right? And wages have stagnated. In fact, a lot of people even took pay cuts over the course of the pandemic. So I think that is why unionize. The process itself was a long process. We started organizing at the museum probably about a year before we went public. And it was a process in which we were just talking to people, having conversations with our coworkers, breaking down silos. My institution, I can't speak for everyone, but is extremely hierarchical and extremely siloed by department. And so one of the biggest challenges was just getting to know our coworkers and talking about our experiences. And it was a long haul. It took a lot of work. So conversations need to start, and then you need to keep having those conversations as you move into not only voting to form a union, but then to actually bargain for a contract. The work doesn't stop when you win your vote. It keeps going and going and going. So I think for me personally, what got me involved in this work was I think a real turning point for me was the Art Museum and Transparency salary spreadsheet, which went viral on the internet maybe 4 years ago now. I don't remember the exact date, but it was a spreadsheet in which people were sharing their salaries, the benefits, how long they've worked at the museum, and what other whatever other type of information they were willing to share. And I remember the morning that I saw that spreadsheet, my first reaction was oh my gosh, this is so scandalous. We don't talk about money, right? This is something we're supposed to talk about. And I was, and I think that's because a lot of us are enculturated to just believe that we're told we're not supposed to talk about money and salaries, and we kind of internalized that to the point that it's detrimental, I think, to our own kind of success and ability to advocate for ourselves. By the end of the day, that day when the spreadsheet went viral, I added my information, but I was very nervous about it. I like, become in the museum world, in nonprofit world, in arts and culture work, I think we're kind of told that, like, we're just lucky to be in the room. The jobs are so competitive. So, like, it's expected that you're not going to make a lot of money. In fact, when I was offered my job at the museum, after a week's long interview process, I don't think I had one conversation during the interview process where we talked about salary. And that's partly my fault. I didn't ask about it, and then when I was offered the job, the person offering it to me prefaced the salary by saying, we don't do this for the money. And then told me the number. And it wasn't terrible for me at the time. I was like trying to get my foot in the door. I thought $40,000 was a lot, to be perfectly honest, coming from adjuncting in New York and trying to find jobs all over the place and hustling. But it's not a lot. It's really not a lot. And 7 years later, I've gotten some raises periodically over the course of my time at the museum, but it's never guaranteed. You never know what's going to happen. And it's really hard to advocate for yourself in those spaces. So I hope that answers some of the questions that you asked. And I'll let Maria and Jessica kind of add on to anything I might have missed.
Sure. I'm actually particularly interested in what Maria would have to say in comparison to your experience, Adam, because forgive me if I got this wrong, but MoMA's union is quite established and it's been around for a while, right? So what does it mean in comparison to you, sort of like arriving at an institution that's long been unionized already? And so, like, how does that feel? How's that different for you as opposed to, say, Adam's experience here?
Sure. Well, I think there are a lot of overlaps in the sense that the conflicts continue. I mean, of course, I don't have the experience of organizing a new shop. I've heard a lot about it from friends, and Local 2110, the local that the MoMA union that I'm part of is affiliated with, is the one that has organized tons of other museums and institutions in New York. So I've heard a lot through that. But I think that it's the feeling of solidarity continues, and the benefits of getting to know, like what Adam was saying about getting to know people across the museum. I've found that to be really a powerful experience. That's something I've had the privilege of doing through being a steward, because people come to, we have like 5 stewards, and people from all departments will email you with their issues. And I have gotten to know people that I would never work with, like same as Adam was saying, like MoMA's a very siloed place in some ways. And I work with a handful of departments, but there are people I would never have occasion to professionally interact with, people in visitor engagement or registrar or like library and art. Like there's just all kinds of, it's very siloed environment. So it's a great way to meet people and build relationships across the institution. I would also say being in a union, even a long established union, has meant having a really helpful framework for analyzing and resolving conflicts, because one kind of common anti-union refrain that comes up a lot during organizing campaigns, and I think persists, is that creating a union will divide people. It'll create conflict, right? Like it's this outside entity that stands between you and your employer. It's not of the place, right? It's not an organic thing. So it's really kind of common thing that comes up. But to me, it's absurd because there's already conflict. The workplace is already divided, and that's why people unionize in the first place. There are class divides in any institution. There are racial divides, gender divides. So I think what I like about being in a union is it gives you this formalized way to deal with tensions between you and the managers, conflicts around job responsibilities, salary, what's appropriate, safety concerns, especially during the pandemic. It takes something that you usually just gossip with your coworkers about, complain about at lunch, and it gives it a process. So
Mhm.
there's a grievance process, you can go to arbitration, you have access to a legal team if you need it, things that on your own are really prohibitive. And so it gives you a lot of resources to deal with issues that come up day to day. And another thing I'll add is that because you have to renegotiate your contract every couple of years, you kind of get to relive this more animated and dramatic, not as dramatic as organizing a first-time shop, but in 2018, when MoMA was last time that we negotiated our contract with manager, it was a really dramatic period. And I feel like it gave us this, even the long timers, a sense of what it's like to for that conflict to be very much alive. And I will say that being in a union gave me an amazing political education. Everything from like how to analyze, you learn about labor law, you learn about how do you create a campaign, how do you strategize, how do you communicate with coworkers, how do you talk to the public, talk to the press. It's just it's such an amazing multifaceted education in a broad sense, way beyond the like nitty-gritty of museum unions in a way. So those are just two things but I definitely agree with everything Adam said about aiding in transparency, about pay, communication, all those things I've experienced as well.
Gotcha. Thank you. Jessica, what do you think? Why union? Why did what does the union do for you all at the Penn Museum?
Well, I think what Maria said is really important, and part of what is great about a union is that you don't get a raise or treated a certain way because you have a good relationship with one person over another. One of the union busting ideas that they put out there a lot is like, this will destroy your relationship with your manager. You won't be able to talk to your manager one-on-one or resolve conflicts with your manager. But that like completely ignores the fact that a lot of people have extremely contentious relationships with their managers and don't have any opportunity to talk to their manager already. And a union creates a scenario where everyone has like a fair stake at talking to the people who are in charge of their employment. And, everyone gets the ability to have sort of like the same treatment. Like if you are having a hard conflict with your manager and they're not interested in helping with that conflict, then you have a space to go to where you can have an outside opinion and someone help you with that conflict. So that's really important, and it also means that like, the special, we all know that like, in every department or every museum, there are some people who like, for some reason, just get better treatment than others, and maybe they get a raise more regularly, or maybe they get other benefits that some employees don't. And this sort of levels the playing field and equalizes that for everyone, so that everyone has access to raises and better living conditions.
Gotcha.
And, Adam said this, and it's true. It's a long process, the union organizing process. And for Penn Museum, we were doing the majority of it during the pandemic, which made it even harder. But for me personally, made it more more exciting, because I was a fairly new employee at the Penn Museum when the pandemic started. So I actually really got to know people really well, in a way that I wouldn't have. Over the pandemic, my job would not have required me to talk to many people at the museum. And I got to know a lot of people that way. And it was really interesting. And I was really grateful for that when we got back to work in person, because I wasn't like starting almost as a new person who had already worked there for a year and a half, but didn't know anyone.
Yeah, so it's interesting because it like you said, and I think Marie and Adam alluded to this too, it kind of levels the playing field in the sense that there's less opportunities for favoritism, whatever. So it's an interesting thing to think about. And so I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, if you don't mind, dovetailing into our next question. All of you mentioned interacting with different types of professionals in your institutions, right? Adam, for example, you mentioned the silo, breaking down the silos and kind of trying to bring people together. But nonetheless, at a lot of organized workplaces, museums and otherwise, different kinds of professionals, different kinds of workers are represented differently by different kinds of museums. So the PMA, for example, has a wall-to-wall union, and UPenn's museum does not. So Jessica, if you'd like to start us off, how are different types of professions represented differently at your institution, and what do those distinctions mean?
So the idea of a wall-to-wall union is a union where professional employees and non-professional employees, and those terms, professional, non-professional, are distinctions created by the National Labor Relations Board, NLRB. They're not value judgments, they're legal terms for different types of jobs in an institution. So PMA has a wall-to-wall union where professionals and non-professionals are in a union together. And it includes people from all departments and sort of like all skill levels of work and all types of jobs. So art handlers and curators and registrars and education folks and visitor services folks. We, of course, at the Penn Museum wanted to have a wall-to-wall union. That is, I think, the goal, and it is, I think, probably the goal for a lot of museums moving forward. But because of these legal distinctions between professional and non-professional, they do, when the vote comes around, they get counted separately. And, in our case, the professional employees didn't have a majority yes vote, but the non-professional employees do. But what makes a person a professional employee or a non-professional employee? These distinctions, or the law that created these distinctions, was written almost 100 years ago and hasn't been changed at all since then. So if you can imagine what a professional or a non-professional job was in 1935, it's probably very different than what it is now. My job, which is categorized as non-professional, probably didn't even exist in museums, 100 or even 50 years ago. Academic engagement departments didn't really exist. Education certainly, but the specific type of work that I do. And so the easy way to to categorize these two groups is that professional employees have specialized skills and specialized degrees, and non-professional employees don't. But I have a specialized degree and specialized skills that are required in the job description of the job that I applied for. So ultimately, the answer for this, for us, for PMA, for Penn Museum, is that these distinctions are meaningless. Ultimately, for us, we don't want there to be this type of distinction. We all work together. We all help each other out. We all do different levels of work, and we all take on different tasks and work together to create all of the wonderful programming and exhibitions and education programs that museums create. So no job is or should be valued more than another based on these distinctions. And so it was tough. It was a tough thing for us when we didn't get to have a wall-to-wall union. But we can't unfortunately change the labor laws at the moment.
No, I understand. Thank you. That was a very detailed description of the actual distinctions and where they come from in this case. And I'm curious what Adam's experience is, if you don't mind commenting at this point, Adam, since PMA was wall to wall from the start, what's that been like for you?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and thank you, Jessica, for explaining that because you did a far better job than I could have. I will say that there are challenges presented by being a wall-to-wall union, and there are wonderful benefits to it also, like anything. So, one of the things that the museum said when we were first organizing, the argument they were kind of broadcasting to staff was that your jobs are so different. Like, how can you have any interests in common? Like, and specifically, I think they went a little too hard on this point in trying to kind of really exploit the professional, non-professional divide. Specifically along, they used the terms, if I remember correctly, like art expert and non-art expert, one was mission, the professionals were mission oriented around the art of the museum, and the non-professionals were not. They were not art oriented jobs, and it was just like, wait a minute, I'm sorry, you're telling me for some reason that folks in retail whose job it is to support exhibitions by creating retail experiences for folks, they're not art-centered work. That's not art-centered work. That's not about the exhibition. You're telling me the visitor service staff who greet people at the door and tell people and help visitors have a good experience at the museum, that's not art-centered, mission-centered work. Yeah, exactly. I'm seeing the chat. Thank you, Gabe. Yeah, try meeting your mission without custodial staff. Yeah. So I mean, it was really wild, and it I think backfired spectacularly on management, that argument, because it was really divisive. But one of the challenges of being in a wall-to-wall unit is, I think there is sometimes this. There can be this idea that what does a curator have in common with someone in education, for instance, right? I'm in education, and that can be a hard thing to overcome, those divisions that are kind of baked into the structure of museums, and they're I think we were really lucky to be able to overcome them, and we put a lot of work into it. And we're because we're all fighting for the same, changes in the workplace that will make our workplace safer and, more, equitable, and all of the things that we hope our museums can be. But it's not easy either way. It's kind of like what Maria was saying earlier. This has been a real education for me in political organizing. I was really naive coming into. I was very naive coming into this. I was a part of a union when I was adjuncting at NYU, but I wasn't participating. All I knew was that my healthcare got better one year. And I was great. And becoming involved in organizing, it really changed things for me. And, serving in a executive role right now with the union as the president of our union, it's been a real learning experience. So yeah, it's I'll leave it there. I'll leave it there. I wonder if Maria has anything that she could add to that.
Yeah, Maria, I'm curious. How is MoMA's union structure set up? I'm under the impression that it has different realms, but in what way is it arranged? Is it like Penn museums or?
So the unit that I'm a part of is one of 5 unions that represent staff at the museum. So the union, the local 2110, represents non-management staff across the museum, with the exceptions of security guards who are in their own union. Then there's a different union for engineers, carpenters. There's a union for, I mean, there's actually, this is kind of adorable.
Oh, Maria,
It's the
I think
tiniest union.
you're breaking up just a little bit.
Oh.
Okay, wait, I think you're better now. Okay, I think we're good.
Yeah, so I was saying, so there's the smallest union is 2 people. It only represents 2 people. So altogether, there are 5 unions, and Local 2110 is the largest one. We have about 200 members, but within the membership, there are people from across the museum, from education, all the curatorial departments, visitor engagement, retail, accounting, registrar, library archives. I'm probably for conservation. I'm probably forgetting some, but it's the graphic designers. So it's across the board, with the exceptions of those roles that are represented by other unions. I'm not 100% sure about when those other units formed. I know that my shop formed in 1971. I'm not 100%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure when the others formed. So that's the kind of the structure there.
Gotcha. And so following up with you, if you don't mind starting us off, Maria, on the next question. So I'm curious, in your experience, have you seen your museum union interface, and perhaps other museum unions in like sort of the MoMA union space, interface and connect with other significant issues facing the museum field? What can museum unions do to address issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, racial justice, and other issues, social justice related issues that those of us working in the museum field experience and are adjacent to and see? So if you have any thoughts on that, go for it.
Sure. Well, I would say that unions create a more equitable workplace by first and foremost improving members' pay and job security, and providing various protections. I know that one of the primary concerns of museum workers who bargaining their first contracts is to, as Adam already alluded to, is dramatically or trying to dramatically significantly improve salaries. And I feel like that there's a special concern for the lowest paid members, who are usually frontline staff. I don't have statistics on this, but I can speak to it anecdotally. At MoMA, the frontline staff is, I think, much more racially diverse than the so-called office or administrative staff. And they're also the lowest paid. I don't think that's a coincidence. And so I think that by fighting collectively to specifically raise up everyone's salaries, but also those who are lowest paid, I think that in and of itself is kind of a helpful way in which like economic justice and racial justice can intersect. And, as we all know, and as Adam alluded to as well, even the higher level non-management jobs in the nonprofit sector tend to have very low salaries. So I think that fighting for a living wage across the board makes it much more likely that people from less privileged socioeconomic backgrounds will enter the museum field and find it a sustainable place to have long-term careers, that they won't, while they have student loans to pay and all kinds of, bills, that they will be able to stick around, that it's not just a place for people from wealthier backgrounds. And I think it's important for us to battle against the idea that people in the art world are all trust fund babies. I think we want to fight for. So I feel like pay is actually incredibly important in that regard. And then I think another thing that union contracts can provide is that is really language that's for everyone, but I think also helps combat discrimination, is the clause that employees can only be disciplined and terminated for just cause, which I think is really helpful in terms of protecting people against various forms of discrimination in a way that I think at-will employees just don't have that kind of protection. Like, of course, there are labor laws that supposedly protect you from being discriminated against, but I think pursuing complaints and legally is probably very cumbersome. And like I mentioned before, there are built-in grievance and arbitration procedures in a union with a union. So you have that kind of legal protection against various forms of discrimination. So I think those are two major things. But I will say that I think that it's essential that unions take like an explicitly anti-racist stance, and that they become, I think it's a great challenge for us in the labor movement to think about how we can build in like anti-racist and other kinds of language into our contracts that is like creative, that goes beyond so-called like bread and butter issues, to fight for accessibility, to fight for, and I think that's a really good challenge. I don't have all the answers for that, but I think, yeah, gaining information, more transparency about salaries, more transparency perhaps about statistics about how the staff breaks down in terms of different identities would also help. So I'm definitely like, that's an area that I think is, I don't have answers to, but I think it's a really rich, it's a great challenge for unions, I think, to think about like, what can we fight for on those fronts as well, beyond the kind of core things that we've done so well historically.
Gotcha. Thank you. That was a very thoughtful answer. Jessica, do you have anything to add to Maria's thoughts here?
You know, we went public with our campaign only a few weeks after the information came out in the news about the Penn Museums having moved the remains of some of the children killed in the MOVE bombings in our possession. And one of the union busting rhetoric pieces that the museum and the university used a lot was that a union can't necessarily change things like this within the museum space. You know, like you don't have the power to, the union won't have the power to make these kinds of decisions or influence these sorts of things at all. And that is a disheartening thing to hear. But I think that what a union can offer in these spaces and these times is a group of people that have the ability to communicate with each other in an effective way, to come up with a response, you know, a collective response. It's not just one person in a department suggesting that something the museum's doing is unethical. A whole group of people can come together and as a group decide to make a statement or, you know, take an action or something like that. And I hope that museum unions can, this can, like Maria said, museum unions can be a place for more collective action around racial justice and social justice issues. And it seems, you know, like it's a good, I have like a good feeling that that is going to be a really helpful spot. You know, museums that have unions are going to maybe be able to have a little bit more, to push a little harder against their institutions' racist tendencies.
No, that's, I think, probably true. And finally, Adam, do you have anything to add on to what Jessica and Maria have said about this?
Yeah, I can just briefly speak to it. I think Maria and Jessica, you kind of covered it beautifully. But I would say that to echo Maria's point, like, you know, the history of unions is not one without its own problems. So like, I think really centering anti-racist kind of ways of thinking into the work that we're doing is really important, and it's really important to center that. I will say that it's, you know, it's challenging, you know, in a contract, like when you're fighting for a contract, when you're negotiating a contract, there are certain things that management is required to negotiate with the union on. And then there are other things that they can they can engage with you on, but they can also give you the, excuse my language, or just give you the big middle finger and say, no, we're not engaging with this because it's not required by law for them to engage with it, to actually negotiate it. You know, like the places where we can make a change, I think, is in fighting for, like, in building, you know, kind of contract language that does create more job security, that, you know, creates a system where you can, you know, move up within the museum, you know, not relying on favoritism from, you know, a manager, right? Those things I think are really important in kind of implementing some of these desperately needed changes within arts institutions. One of the things that I will say has come up repeatedly in our negotiations, and our museum is represented by Morgan Lewis Law Firm, which is a major anti-union law firm, multinational law firm, but they've chosen to be represented by Morgan Lewis. One of the arguments that their lawyers have continuously made is that if management doesn't have the kind of unilateral right to hire who they want to hire, right? Like if we require in our contract that they look first to folks internally, so their argument is like, if we can't hire who we want, how can we create a diverse workforce? So like what they've been trying to do is kind of weaponize these DEIA issues to kind of argue that they know best, right? Like they need the ultimate power to do what they want to do in order to create this utopian museum filled with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's been really upsetting to see. I'll just say that. And I want to acknowledge, like, as a, like I am able to speak to these issues partly because of my own like privilege as like, and this is something I found throughout this process and even before we started unionizing, when I was talking to the press about other issues with senior management at the museum at BMA, like I felt protected in doing so because I'm a cis white man, these are things that I just think we really have to push back against that narrative, that job security. I think job security will absolutely increase diversity and equity within institutions like ours. And I think that argument that the management was making was just bunk. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for those thoughts. And thank you to all three of you for fielding my questions tonight and being good sports about it. And taking the time to think through this together with me and with our audience here. And in our last 10 minutes, I would like to give our audience the opportunity to ask questions. And thankfully, we have a tech team here who has been accruing and gathering questions and will be sending them to me to ask to you all. And while they do that, I'm just going to reshare the contact slide. So if anybody would like to get in touch with any of you all or your representative unions, they can. And so yes, if our tech team here could be sending questions to me, and then I will read them in order. Okay. All right, so the first one, and I won't be calling on you guys. I think if you all could just jump in as you feel appropriate, that would be ideal. The first one, and I think this was actually originally directed to Adam. Did any of the management support of the idea of a union? Did anyone in the management space?
Okay, yes, let me unmute myself. So, it's, yes, there has been support from folks in management positions. The way that National Labor Relations Board, and apologies for my dog if you hear her in the background, the way the National Labor Relations Board kind of decides who's union eligible or not is based on whether you supervise someone. So like if you are if you are supervising workers, if you are managing their payroll, if you are doing kind of yearly kind of what you would call it, yearly reviews, if your institution does that, then you are technically supervisor. And so, one of the things that happened early on after we won the vote is we had to go into unit clarification kind of arbitration with the NLRB, which meant that basically the union was saying that some roles are, we thought certain positions within the museum should be in the unit, and the museum said that no, they shouldn't be because they're supervisory. What's kind of crazy about that, and this kind of connects to, I think, what Jessica was saying earlier about kind of like these laws that were written almost 100 years ago, and how the work that we do today doesn't necessarily reflect what the reality of the world is. So, like there can be a person, like there are a lot of people within the Philadelphia Museum of Art who like supervise like one person. Right. It's not like a factory, right? Like, like when these laws were written, it was a factory. There was a like floor manager and then like workers on the factory floor, right? Who reported to them. Within our institutions, and I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this, like that's not the case at all. So like, is it really true? Like, I mean, does it hold that like, if you supervise a single person at the museum, that you shouldn't be allowed into the union because of that. So negotiating that with management and with our lawyers was challenging, and we won a lot of those positions into our unit because they, the NLRB deemed that they were not actually supervisory. So that's one thing. But yes, managers have been supportive. It's tricky though with management, like middle management, because like, I can speak out on behalf of the union because I'm in the union and I'm protected, right? Because of that, it's a little harder for middle managers. And I really do kind of feel in a lot of ways for them being put in a position where like they may be supportive, right? But like if they speak out in support, if they, question senior management about a decision that's made around the union, like they can be fired at will, right? Mm-hmm. So that it is a tricky thing to navigate, but there has been support. I will say that.
Gotcha. Thank you, Adam. Maria, Jessica, would you like to comment about management and unions? No? All right. Next question. In large museums with many layers or levels of management, are there rules about who's allowed to be in a union? Adam, you touched on this before. For example, if someone is a mid-level manager, are they allowed or invited to join the union? Just curious about where the line is drawn between staff and management with a capital M.
I think Adam kind of answered that, but I will just add that I think that a lot of people have the job title with the word manager in it, and I know at MoMA, for example, a lot of people with that title don't actually supervise anyone or seem to have any kind of managerial responsibilities. So it's actually a very sneaky way for institutions to promote, like people will get promoted out of the bargaining unit just by having manager in their title. And it's a very kind of, even though legally they're probably not a manager or supervisor. So it's something to keep an eye out for too, that's a kind of trick that, but yeah.
I do think that it is important to note that some of the laws around these things have changed also, like the difference between the PMA situation and the Penn Museum situation were different when things were decided by the NLRB were different for us because law had changed in the meantime. And so the positions that could be in the union for PMA, they went into this arbitration to decide who was going to be in the union, what positions could be in the union, happened after their election. So they had maybe a larger amount of people voting in the election than maybe ended up in the union. But for us, because a law had been changed in the meantime, those positions were all chosen before the election. And there were still a few contested ones. But that I think it makes a huge difference too, right? Like anti-union laws that are being put into effect in our government affect the ability for people to unionize in their workplace.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I would just say, I just want to shout out Jessica also because, you know, like it's very different to organize, like at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which is granted as a big, you know, institution, but the Penn Museum was organizing in the face of a giant institution in Philadelphia, like the University of Pennsylvania, and that is pretty incredible in and of itself. But I would also just echo that, like what Maria was saying, that the chat popped up in front of something. At museums, I think a lot of folks might have an experience with this, that like there are so many unique titles like within museums. Like I've had so many different titles in my time at the PMA, and no one else has ever held those titles since I moved on and was promoted out of those roles. So it is a way that museums are able to kind of sneak around, like kind of also like having consistent, transparent salaries, right? Like if everyone has a unique title, they can pay whoever they want, whatever they want, because they all have unique titles. So it's a really huge problem, I would say. And one of the things that having a union contract does is it forces management to actually manage, which is not something that management does a lot of times, unless they're really made to. But I'll stop there.
Thank you all. So next up, what makes a position union eligible? And specifically, this person is asking about part-time employees. Do they fit into your unions respectively?
We have part-time and full-time people in our union. We have contract people who are on year-to-year contracts in our union. I'm not sure what makes a position eligible or not. I don't know, Adam or Maria, if you know that a little bit more. But we have people who work 10 hours a week and people who work 35 hours a week in our union. So it is possible, yeah.
All right, moving on. Thank you for that, Jessica. Next question. Are there any barriers aside from management to demanding union and staff representation on the museum board in contract negotiations? Interesting, very technical question.
Sorry, Alex, can you just repeat the question? I'm not sure I caught it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Are there any barriers aside from management to demanding union and or staff representation on the museum board in contract negotiations?
Well, I'm not sure I'm answering this question correctly, but I'll take a stab at it. So at negotiation, we have during contract negotiations, we established early on open bargaining, where anyone in the unit can attend whenever they want to attend bargaining. So, I'd say we have weekly bargaining sessions with management, most nights that we do this. And this is, employees who are taking flex time, basically. and making up the time because they run from 4 until 7:30 every Wednesday. They are able to come whenever they want. Management does not allow anyone to show up to, it's a very tightly controlled group. So there's reps from HR at negotiations, at the bargaining table. There are 2 lawyers who work for the museum who are at negotiations. And then there are usually 2 lawyers from Morgan Lewis, the law firm that that the museum has hired who come to negotiations. So it's HR and basically lawyers.
Adam, if I can interrupt you briefly, the person who wrote that is actually about to clarify what he meant.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So
but no board members, if the question is if the board members have ever attended negotiations, not once have they.
All right, go for it, Gabe. And following this, I'm sorry to say I'll have to wrap it up because we are past 7. So go for it. Yeah.
Sorry, I worded that very poorly. I meant as part of a contract negotiation, could you demand to have union or staff representation on or in board meetings going forward? Basically have something similar to the system they have in Germany, where you have at least like one frontline worker within a corporate board.
It's something you can try to win in a contract. It's something we have been trying to win. I think it's something that's less common in newer contracts, to be honest. I don't know what the situation is at MoMA, Maria, but back in, there are some very strong contracts that, date back to like the 70s that actually, accommodate for that. That is something that's really hard to win in a contract. We would love to have any kind of FaceTime with the board, whether it's a representative. Management has, at the PMA at least, has been very hostile to the idea of having anyone from the union have any type of interaction with the board of trustees. So.
Yep. Thank you for that, Adam. And with that, I'll begin to wrap up. I just wanted to thank the 3 of you once again for joining us tonight, and for all of you, the attendees, for coming to this event. I just want to say once again that this event was hosted by the Museum Council of Greater Philadelphia. And even if you're not in Philly, I know we have kind of a national audience here. Consider signing up, because we have all sorts of great virtual events like this discussing issues relevant to the museum field. And yes, Kim, to answer your question, this event is being recorded, so we will make a recording available. And yeah, consider joining the Museum Council. Think about it. And I wish you all a good night, and here's hoping for snow. I'm personally hoping for snow. I will continue to hope for snow. Yeah, take care, everybody. Thanks for joining us.